So this is an interview with photographer Jen Bowen on September 19th, 2012 in Asheville, North Carolina. So although this interview is going to primarily focus on your journey with photography, would you mind starting off by telling a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jen Bowen. I currently do cultural arts administration for the city of Asheville, and I freelance with photography. So I've lived in Asheville for 20 years this September, which is a long number. What else would you like to know?
Where you went to school?
Okay, I went to University of North Carolina at Asheville. Graduated in 2004 with a degree in New Media Arts and Sciences with emphasis in technical theater design and photography, and had a minor in American history. So I have a deep interest in local history specifically.
Oh, does that come in handy with photography?
Yeah, I mean, it helps to know when you're taking pictures of things what has been there before, to appreciate photographers that have been there before and what they saw, to appreciate the people that have been there before. The land has memory, and sometimes we just activate it with old photos. So.
Yeah, I actually did a project today. We had to do these PowerPoints, and I did, what's his last name? Peter Magbon.
Okay.
And one of his primary points of photography is that you have to keep refreshing everything, because you have an old situation or an old event that's happening in a place, and then the next day the same thing can happen, and it could be completely different, like a completely different dynamic. So photography, he always described it as a refresh button.
Yeah.
Especially when you know enough about the place that you're photographing or the people or something, you can see the changes, and that's maybe.
Definitely. It's kind of funny because Google Earth refreshes consistently.
Oh, yeah.
And you can go and look at places and how they've changed. I was just at it the other day looking at how Pack Square Park, what used to exist there, a decade ago, which was this terrible, terrible landscape with this crisscross pattern and awful parking. It was a mess. And then what it is today, and looking at the transgression of it, it was just sort of, so it allows you to take note of the ephemeral moment and capture it, but also realize that photography itself is ephemeral and constantly is changing. And boy, is it with iPhones. Holy moly,
yeah.
Instagram is the most amazing thing.
$1 billion.
It really is. It's just the most amazing thing. And I often think what Matthew Gardner or Matthew Brady, what they would be thinking if they could see something like that, these days. And the first photographers to see how it's transgressed in
click.
180 years. It's just amazing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. Cool. Yeah, because we upload all of our photos to Flickr,
mm-hmm.
and then go through them. We could just hit slideshow, and it's just we're scrolling and looking at each other's photos. And
yeah, the process has sped up incredibly quickly the past few decades, and with digital photography and computer technology specifically. And it's really fascinating because if you think about it, what is it? Oh my God, what's the statistic? The statistic is some ridiculous amount that 90% of the world's total data has been made in the past decade. It's some sort of statistic like that. Basically, since the internet, the world has been documented on such a level, at such a rapid speed, that everybody is out there documenting. That if any alien form ever wanted to know the history of humanity, they just have to get on the World Wide Web, and it's all there for access. And it's just kind of, I don't know, and how photography plays into that is just, I get on Twitter, and during revolutions in other countries or uprisings or Occupy movements, whatever, I can get on Twitter, enter a hashtag, and boom, I'm seeing exactly what they are in almost real-time moment. It's incredible time we live in.
The whole Egypt situation, that was amazing.
Yeah.
That blew my mind because, especially being at Wilson, a lot of people don't have TVs, and the internet's really bad, and stuff. So when that was happening, I completely like forgot that technology was so strong, and they're thinking about like an off switch button and all these things. I wonder, like.
Yeah, it's a global age, and technology is the key. It really is. It's going to be fascinating to see how the next century will go.
Was it, you mentioned earlier, like, was it hard to switch to digital?
From film?
Because you're kind of, like, giving in to...
Yeah, I mean, I kind of... Well, when it first came out, like all technology, it was big and bulky and expensive and elite, and wasn't as good a quality as what you could get on good film. Even still with medium format, at that time, you could get a much better photograph with a medium format camera than you could with your best digital a decade ago. But now, I mean, they've got digital cameras that are seeing galaxies in space. It's just incredible. And, I mean, they've got digital cameras as good as the Hubble telescope, essentially, which is just fascinating. So, yeah, I was a little bit of a Luddite at first because I just wanted to wait till I got to a point where it was widely accepted. You can't hold on to the past too long. I also had like a personal attachment to my camera because once you really get to know your camera...
Do you have a name?
No, I mean, it was my grandfather's camera though, so it just always kind of was an heirloom, especially after he passed on. And but when you have a manual camera especially, and you've got lenses, and you just know how to work it so fast that when you're in the moment, you can just get your shots, and it's kind of hard. It's like a new car, you kind of got to break it in and get to know it, and so, or a new phone even. So, but yeah, I held on to my camera probably a couple years longer than I maybe should have, but I still appreciated the film experience, even though it was very costly in time and money.
You're like reversed on us.
Yeah.
Well, on your About Me section on your website, you actually told that story about your grandpa. Could you...
Yeah, it's actually my other grandfather that was a photographer, and then my camera belonged to my other grandfather who was in the Navy, and he got it in Japan when he was stationed overseas, and so I got my camera from him, but I got my photography love and passion from my other grandfather. He was stationed in Germany and Austria. Actually, my grandfather was born in the hills of Kentucky. He was so, quote, poor he didn't have a pot to piss in, quite literally. Lived through the Depression. His father had been killed in a duel. He was the town drunk and got killed in a duel, so my grandfather was pretty much the man of the house and had, I can't remember if it was 7 or 8 brothers or sisters and a mother, and So they're in the back hills of Kentucky, and my grandpa, he joins up, he lies about his age, and he joins up into the Army after Pearl Harbor, and he got stationed overseas. He was trained in England for working in the pictures, and it was just about photographing people and taking film of people in England, and then he got stationed over in Vienna, and when he was in Vienna, he saw this pretty young girl, and he asked her best friend who spoke English if she would introduce them, and so they had an ice cream cone. They didn't really speak any of the same language, but 8 months later they were married, and so then he brought my grandmother back, and she was quite unnerved to find out it was the truth that he was so poor he didn't have a pot to piss in. So they kept moving around, and he kept doing photography for the United States Army for many, many years, all through his term, and was even offered a White House photography position under the Nixon administration. But he was always a Democrat, so he didn't have much time for Nixon, and he also didn't like Washington, D.C. Because he was living in the mountains of Colorado. And my grandmother, having been from Vienna, really appreciated the nature to the city. So when I was born in Colorado in 1981, I grew up about an hour south of them, and whenever we'd go up to see them, he would sometimes show me some of his photos, and I just remember seeing a picture on the wall of him leaning against a darkroom enlarger, and I was, what is that? And then they would tell me the stories, and it just seemed like such a fascinating thing, to travel the world and to see things and to capture things, to preserve history, to be the witness of history. That was something that really just at that time sparked with me pretty instantly, and I always knew that I kind of really liked photography at that moment. And my grandmother was an artist, and so through her, I learned a lot of artistry. And my father was in theater, so I learned a lot about drama and light and fabrication of scenes. And so just all kind of culminated together to me wanting to just really explore what the camera holds. It can definitely be a tool that can unlock major things and make you see new things and document, the moment. So it kind of does everything for me.
That's such a cool story.
Yeah.
I love how it's like you have all those perspectives, the theater, the art, and the photography. Do you have, if you could describe your personal definition of photography or documenting, what would it kind of be through all those influences?
Well, I think documentary photography can be anything. It can be adapted and molded. Photography is an art, and in art there are no rules, in my perspective. Documentary photography, though, by putting that documentary in front of it, you do follow a rule, and that is to not alter the scene, unless you're really trying to take a very specific approach with a body of work, where you're documenting it in a different but very well stated way that you're not misleading people. But if you're just trying to do photojournalism, documentary photography, then there is very much a code of ethics as far as keeping, just finding the best shot, the best angle to communicate as much information as possible to your viewer and do it in a very aesthetically pleasing way, because that is the most, if it's aesthetic, it's the easiest way for your eye to follow it and to get the most information. So line, form, shadow, all those things very much, you have to have them sort of instinctively in you when you're documenting events.
Wow, I really like that. So you went to UNCA, and your major...
it was new media arts, so it was about computer sciences and digital arts, and through that we were allowed to do concentrations, and I created a concentration in technical theater because I was interested in how new media and art and theater, how they all kind of come together and impact art, what the new media of art would be for the rest of this century, or for at least this moment in the century. But I also did an emphasis in photography, which was one of the standard emphasis. And I studied under Larry White. He was an old school film photographer. I'm sure he switched over to digital now, but at that point he hadn't really. And I have to admit, my photos are better under digital than they are film.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I can afford better equipment if I wanted to go manual film, because you can buy Hasselblads incredibly cheap now on eBay because nobody wants to use the film, and it's actually becoming a lost art. But in that, as hipsters tend to do, they've made it cool again.
Yep.
So now it's a hip thing to want to carry a Polaroid around. It's not going to be completely lost, and there are those people. Oh, there's this wonderful photographer, Ian. I'm going to lose his last name at the moment. I can look it up later, but Ian something. He is based out of Los Angeles, and he's built this huge. He's got this huge truck. It's a bread truck, and he's turned it into a giant wet plate glass negative camera. The whole truck is a camera, and he does these tintypes that are 10 by 10, 10 feet by 10 feet. And it's just amazing because I love the richness of tintypes. I love the history of photography, how different people look, not just because of their clothes, but in the manner in which they were documented by the photography that existed at that time. Somebody looks so interesting in a tintype, and if they were taken that same picture with a cabinet card at the same time period, they would look completely different in the two types of film. So the tintypes that are being taken of current day things like people skateboarding and girls on the street and the skyline, it just looks fascinating. It's such a juxtaposition between history and the modern age, and it's beautiful work too. He does outstanding work.
Wow,
but
that's amazing.
each picture costs him over $500 just to make it. So again, it's that thing about that type of photography risks being lost because you have to have some sort of major backing or some sort of affluence to be able to go into that to begin with, because it is expensive to do film photography, to have those chemicals, to get the training required to be able to use that process and do it correctly. It's all very expensive at this age, and it's just going to keep getting more expensive and more, more clicked. So I think one of the questions you're asking is like, what advice do I have to people who are studying it? Yes, study that film photography because it is going to become a lost art, and we need to have people who remember how to do it. It'll make you a better photographer, but it'll also just make you a more interesting person as you get older to have those types of technologies still in your head.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that this part was being recorded, but talking about what the first photographers would think of, that might have been now, but, would think of Instagram and stuff like that. I wonder, when no one uses the darkroom. I mean, I hope that...
Yeah, I hope that never happens.
Yeah. How do you think it's going to be, like, preserved?
Like I said, the hipsters and those types of people...
Leave it to the hipsters.
Yeah, I mean, because, gosh, shoot, if there was somebody here in Asheville who knew wet plate process, I would totally take a class from them, because I find it fascinating, but I know it's expensive, and I know that it's, each picture, and if you mess it up, then you just lost it. You lost it. It's just literally down the drain. Mm-hmm. So, if I had the extra money and if there was somebody here, I would totally take that chance to go and learn that process. But there are people, like there's a great artist, it's like the San Francisco photo booth or something like that. It's a shop in San Francisco where it's literally you stop in and get a tintype made of yourself. Not one of those hokey Dollywood ones. Like I'm talking a real honest to gosh tintype, and they come out beautiful. It's like really taking a really good authentic portrait of yourself in that tintype, and you look fascinating compared to what, like if you went to JCPenney's or whatever and got a picture taken. It's just the processes I think are so beautiful and so rich, not only in their history but in the display that you get afterwards. That people, lovers of photography will never let it completely be lost. But I think it'll get less and less and less.
Do you have a favorite photographer?
I've got lots of photographers that inspire me on very different and various realms. Man Ray is great because he's one of the first photographers to say there are no rules, this is an art. Dorothea Lange is a beautiful, and Dorothea Lange is a beautiful documentary artist, whereas Diane Arbus, she's an amazing portrait artist. She really captures people's souls and their underbellies and what's beautiful and grotesque about them at the same time. So I always really liked her stuff growing up. People who influenced me now, that's Ian Fellow, who I can't remember his name, and I feel yes, I want to say it's Ian, specifically somebody who lives in Nashville, and I know that's not his name, so I'm just trying to remember, but it'll come to me. And but also people like JR. JR is a street artist, and he wouldn't call himself a photographer, he would call himself a street artist, but he works with photography. He does these amazing things where he goes to places and he takes pictures of people and he pastes those photos on walls, those portraits on walls. And one of the ones that I really liked the best was he went to Africa, and I'm not going to remember where he went in Africa, but he went to Africa and he went to a place where there had been a great deal of rape and violence on the women. And he took pictures of those women and he put their faces up all over, and not just like little pictures, like huge 30-foot photographs of women wheat pasted to walls and trains and bridges and tops of homes. And he gave them back their power through that experience, through having everybody pay attention and really take stock of their women folk in that community was a huge thing for those people. And it's, art and photography can change lives. And so that's one of the reasons why I particularly like his work as well.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Have you seen the documentary Wasteland?
Oh, yes. I'm actually showing it with the Mobile Art Lab in 2 weeks, but I love it. It's an amazing, amazing film.
And, I mean, I kind of want to get into documentary filmmaking later, so that's primarily why I watched it. And then I saw this class, which is why I got excited, because it was kind of a mixture of both. Because I thought the documentary was good, but then also his idea, coming up with those ideas is amazing, because they really end up touching people,
Yeah.
and it spreads. And
yeah, it is a ripple effect for sure.
yeah,
It's not just changing those people's lives, but that the entire world. You know, it can have the impact to change the world by who it inspires to continue that. You know, speaking of like documentary film, that's another person who inspired me was Ken Burns. Now he's not a photographer, but he appreciates the photograph.
Mm-hmm.
He appreciates the aesthetic, and he appreciates the history that photos can tell. And that was one of the things that first kind of got me into documentary work, was that type of appreciation. Because golly, boy, when I was growing up, it was just the worst stuff they'd show in school. You know, it's like 3, 2, 1 Contact, and just bad films left over from the 70s. And so when you have people like Ken Burns start to come into the scene in the 90s, and they're really showing what history can be and how you can use, you know, that to teach people something interesting. It was really quite revolutionary for documentary work in general.
Yeah. I actually, can you touch a little more on your kind of equation, like history plus photography? Because I find that really fascinating.
What do you mean specifically?
You were saying, you know, with photography, you can show this history, and that it's really important when you are taking photos to know the history and to be aware of the history. And
yeah, well, I mean, I'll just kind of give an example. I went and I did a documentary piece with Barack Obama's inauguration in 2008.
Oh, I was there.
Yeah, I went specifically not just because I wanted to experience the moment in history or to be supportive of any specific politician, but more to go and do documentary film about it. And I didn't, you know, I knew I was not going to be anywhere near the president. I wasn't looking for that angle. I had to be honest and real with myself. What was I going to be able to experience? Where was I going to be at in the crowd? And what was my angle going to be? So I did it, you know, based on some of the, you know, during the actual inauguration, my angle was to kind of document some of the more extreme people who showed up to support it. The people who were just more than overjoyed, more than excited, you know, people who were dressed up like John Adams, and people who were dressed up, there were these yes girls, they were the yes we can women, and they were dressed in these hot pink and bright green outfits that were covered in fur, and they drove in a bus all the way from California, and they had arrows on their hands that said, yes we can, and they were just so excited. So, you know, I wanted to document those kinds of people, the people who were just, that was, because I was in the crowd, so where was I going to go? What was I going to document in that regard? But later, after the inauguration, I wanted to touch on the history of what had happened before, and how was a specific historical location changing or experiencing this event in history, in contemporary history. So what happened at the intersection of U and, was it 16th Street? 16th. U and 16th, when the riots happened from Martin Luther King's assassination, and the fires burned, and the neighborhood crumbled, and then the drugs, and the poverty, and the despair, and the gentrification that came in. And now it's you know, come back around. I wanted to go to that spot and document what was happening on that street in the celebratory moments after the inauguration happened. So I went to Ben's Chili Bowl, which was a very historic place to be. It was one of the few businesses that existed still since 1968. It saw the whole history of that street and those moments. And Martin Luther King Day was the day before Obama's inauguration. They were like a day apart. And so I wanted, you know, to document all of that emotion that was happening in that spot. So I went and having appreciation for that spot, knowing where I was, knowing what ghosts I was walking amongst, allowed me to have a different view of it. And when I got there, man, everything was just amazing. You know, there was a Shepard Fairey mural on the wall, which was a beautiful thing to like get to see one of his pieces in person. And then there was a parade of people who literally, and they were all white folk. They were all white folk, hippie folk. You know, they were gentrification, essentially, in a parade, marching down the street, so excited, marching past, you know, right there on the intersection, and then marching down U Street, past the Chili Bowl. And there's all these African-American folk outside waiting for chili. There's a giant inflatable Martin Luther King on top of the building. There's a giant 10-foot tall, well, maybe it was 6 feet tall, red, white, and blue Obama, the name Obama's ice sculpture in front of Ben's Chili Bowl. All these African-American folk outside eating their chili in this great Americana kind of moment. And here comes, like, these white folk, and they're throwing peace signs at each other. And that, to me, like, knowing the history of what I was there to experience and what had happened, 40 years previous, that was just a moment. And knowing that history really brought it together for me and allowed me to do a better job, I think, in documenting that.
How did that picture turn out?
Oh, it's fun. I mean, if you ever want to see him, I'm more than happy to send you the link online. Yeah.
I love that. That's awesome. That's so cool. Yeah, when I was at the inauguration, I had to walk all the way to Waterfront. So I missed that. But it was an amazing experience. I remember I saw a woman who had all these, she was trying to sell t-shirts, like I Love DC t-shirts, but she was painting, like, you with a Sharpie, so she'd paint you with a Sharpie so you'd kind of remember the experience, and then people would, like, pay her, but everyone was just like things like that. It's also, I can't really remember. I remember I climbed on the porter potties to see, to like jump up and
yeah, I got pictures of all that. People trying to climb on top of buildings to get a better view, and the cops pulling them down.
Yeah, you could see the little snipers everywhere. Like, and it was raining.
It was. We got there, actually, we took the first train in from Greenbelt. We got on the first metro train that morning. We got there as soon as we possibly could, because I wanted to document the sunrise. I wanted to document setting it up. So we were right up as close as the general public could possibly get, but we actually moved back to the Washington Monument for the actual event, because it just got so packed, and I wanted to just try and see everybody and everything.
There's so many people there.
I wasn't there to see the president. I was there to see the other people.
Yeah.
So that was my take on it. But it was a really fun. It was the most historical moment that I've had as far as like that kind of a scale.
Was that just for
shits and giggles?
Yeah.
Just because that's what I do. That's because what I needed to do at that moment in time.
So when did Faces with Asheville kind of become an idea?
When I was in Pennsylvania doing the AmeriCorps, there was a gentleman there working out of the downtown art museum, contemporary studio and art museum, doing a project called Faces of Reading, and he was just doing straight portraits, just like you come in, straight portrait, nothing specific or individualized about you, just kind of who you are as you are on the street. And I thought that would be cool, but these photos don't communicate enough to me. I want to know more about who these people are. So I thought, gosh, Asheville is so full of character. So full of character. And to do this kind of a project in Asheville would be really interesting. But he was doing it in black and white. I did not, like, black and white works well for some documentary photography, but for portraiture, especially documentary portraiture, I wanted it in color, because I think color is a lot about a person's personality, and to lose that information was not something I wanted. I wanted as much information as I possibly could in these portraits. So color was something I wanted. So, I was just thinking, like, how would I do it differently if I did something like that? And that was in 2005. And then when I came back to Asheville, and I was planning to go to New York City, but things happened and I got stuck here. I decided, well, I'm here. I might as well do something. And that was actually the moment that I switched to digital. I hadn't done any digital photography previous to Faces of Asheville.
Oh, wow.
That was the project that made me switch to digital, because I was like, hell no, I'm not spending my life in a darkroom, trying to get the best. And I knew I wanted to do color processing, and I didn't have access to a color darkroom. And it would be far too expensive to send it out. So that was the moment when I was like, okay, we're going to do it we're going to switch over to digital. So the fascinating thing is, like, it kind of started very grassroots. I was looking for 100 people, very small case study of what kind of Asheville is. I live downtown, across from the skate park, and I wanted to just kind of grab people off the street, like, come over to my house, I have an extra room that I've converted into a studio, let me take your picture, and send you on your way.
Did it work like that?
It did at first. I actually started off with like a huge house party. We had a huge house party so that anybody could come and not really feel like they were having to have like too much of an experience, that because people get really camera shy. It's a very intimate thing to get your portrait taken, and I wasn't sure how I would do as a photographer, because this was the first time I was doing portraiture. It was my first experience doing any kind of portraiture whatsoever. I'd always been sort of a still life documentary type photographer previous to that, like documentary as in like what is an event happening, and not people, not like having to actually face people. I was more novice before that, in that I was always taking portraits of people who were old or young, because the elderly and the youth are not threatening to take pictures of. So you'll notice that with a lot of early photographers, like beginning photographers, they're going to take pictures of kids and of elders because they're non-threatening.
Huh, why are they non-threatening?
Because they're just not. They're not going to get up in your face and be like, "What are you doing?"
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're not going to...
They're just
they're just going to smile at you or maybe give you a snarl, but they're not going to chase you down the street with their cane or anything.
Oh,
you know?
okay,
so,
yeah.
A lot of, novice photographers, that's kind of what you'll see them when they're doing street photography. They'll be taking portraits of people like that. So this is my first time, like, dealing with kind of public. I wasn't sure how I was going to do as a photographer, having these intimate moments with people, how to kind of get them to loosen up. So we started with a big house party, made it kind of a big thing, a big to-do, and I only wanted 100 people, and I got, I think, 111 people signed up, and I had taken 103 photos, and my house was burglarized. I get this call from my roommate. He's like, "Jen, I think the house has been burgled." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "I'm 2 blocks away. Oh my God, is the studio okay?" He's like, "I don't know. I'm standing outside with a hatchet. I'm not going back in." So we pull up, and he's like standing outside and like holding a little axe, and I'm just like, oh, "Okay, that's not gonna do anything." But
you're not gonna hit someone.
So I pull up and I like go and I look, and it turns out that how they broke in was through the side door, which was the side door that actually entered into the extra room that I converted into a studio. And in the process of opening the door, the backdrop that I had up was over that door. So when they opened the door, they busted it in. It knocked the backdrop over, broke the backdrop, or like bent the poles, knocked over the tripod, which in turn, it got bent up. It knocked over the lights. Those got broken. So essentially almost everything was trashed in the studio. Everything was trashed. And it wasn't like they meant to do it. It was just they broke in, and in the process of that process, they destroyed my entire studio. And then all they stole was my computer and my camera. That's all they took.
Did they have all those photos on it?
It had all but 40 photos, like 36, 40 photos were left, is what I had on like a card, essentially, a little, essentially like a roll of film, but a digital card. And so I had like 40 pictures left, and cops never found anybody. I had a couple suspects, but was never able to catch or prove anything. And so I was kind of bummed out, and it was really weird because that was all they stole. And they stole my grandfather's camera, the manual one. And I was bummed out. I was more bummed out about that, actually, than, because I was like, you know what? I met all these great people. I had a really great experience doing it. I learned a lot. I grew a lot as a photographer. And though they can take away the product, they can't take away that process. And that process was worth so much more to me. So I'm not upset about that. I was upset in the initial moment, but I was easily able to cope with it after, a few minutes of retrospect. But losing my grandfather's camera, that hurt me. We were lucky we found it the next morning. They realized, I guess, that it wasn't a digital camera, and it was really heavy because old metal bodies on those cameras, pretty heavy, and they dumped it in the weeds, and I was able to get it back. So that was a blessing. And so then by that point, I had kind of made my peace with losing the photos. But I said I was going to give myself 3 days to really think about it. There's this great quote by Bill Shakespeare where he says, "There's nothing that is either good nor bad, but it is your perspective that makes it so." And I just kind of kept, I'd heard that recently in that time period, and so that kept going through my head during the whole time. And I was just like, I'm not upset. process was great. I'm really glad I got to meet all these people. I've made a few friends and through it, and you know, it's okay. And then what happened was WLOS picked up on it, and it ended up on the front page of the Mountain Express. The Citizen Times covered, all because of the burglary. The burglary gave it such a new aspect of human interest that people now all of a sudden wanted to participate, wanted to see me do it over again. And I said, okay, tell you what, we're going to do a fundraiser.
Were you planning on doing it over again?
I said I was going to give myself 3 days, and by the end of the third day I said, you know what, if we can make it happen through public support, we'll make it happen, sure. And I was like, you got to buy a new camera, you got to buy a new computer, you got to buy all this equipment. If we can raise some money, sure, I'll do it over again. But, you know, I don't have any money to put out. And we did a fundraiser through Laugh, and through that... and a grant through the regional artist project grant given through the State Arts Council to local arts council agencies to re-grant out to their local people. I got a grant through them, and I got a lot of fundraising through the Lexington Avenue Arts and Fun Festival. And in that process, we were able to raise enough that we did it over again. So the second time, we did it at the Wedge Studio down here in the River Arts District. We weren't going to
have a house party.
Have a house. It's like, you know, you don't need to know where I live. Yeah, because I'm pretty sure it's one of you people that robbed my house. So, like, you know, when you're like asking people to come in off the street in case your house.
Almost a good idea.
Almost a good idea. Oh, that naivety on my behalf. Yeah, I was very innocent and trusting. So I decided I needed to grow up a little and take a new approach to it and insure all my equipment and make sure everything was, you know, legit this time. So we subleased the studio from the artist Ben Betzalel and used that for 3 months that winter and did 300, almost 400 photos, new portraits. And yeah, it was a great experience. Every single person who came in, I gave them a cup of tea, hot tea, because it was wintertime and I knew that people were going to be cold, and tried not to keep them waiting. But at that point, I'd also learned so much that all those mistakes that I'd made the first go around. I was so thankful to get a second chance at it, because this time okay, this is what I can do different. I get this do-over. I get that second chance. Not many people do. And that was a total blessing, because then I was able to get people to fill out an oral history report with me and a physical history with me. I gave everybody a self-addressed stamped envelope when they left, and I said, inside that envelope was a letter to them. It said, you know, thank you for participating in the project. You know, we're all in Asheville for a reason. Please tell me your story. Why are you here? What keeps you here? What do you love? What do you hate? What do you like? What do you dislike? What do you want to keep the same forever? And what do you desperately want to change? Tell me these things. Tell me your dreams. Tell me your hopes. Give me whatever you'll work with, and send it back to me. You know, there's a stamp already on it. And I got a return rate of over 200 letters, so that was excellent.
Wow, that must have been fascinating.
Oh, yeah, and I still have all the primary source documents. They're all supposed to be gifted off to the special collections at UNC Asheville, but I just have not had the moment to really sift through them yet to get them up to that process of where they need them to be for me to submit them. But that's their home eventually. And, you know, it's just a fascinating thing about documenting. My goal through that process, my documentary hope in that process, was to document individuality, because Asheville is a place where individuals can be free to be individuals. You can be however freaking crazy you want and walk around downtown, and you're probably not going to get judged. You'll get looked at, but people come here to look at things like that.
It's very true.
Especially at that time period. There was just, you know, we've had some real characters over the years in Asheville. Like the guy who ran for mayor who only wore a thong in downtown, for months. That was his shtick. And you're just like, hey, you know, it's kind of just interesting characters. Yeah, we've had, lots of little interesting characters along the way. And I wanted to kind of document the fact that Asheville was a really remarkable place at the beginning of the 21st century, because we had taken what it means to be an individual and perfected it while also allowing people to be in a community and having this sense of community or communities. You know, there's fractions of different communities, but all around, you know, what it is to be in Asheville. People who live in Asheville at that time were very much happy to live here. very much proud to live here for the most part. And, you know, I think it was kind of, for me, a process of me seeing where we stand at the 21st century as far as what did it mean for us to go through postmodernism and modernism and the change of the individual throughout the cultural history of the past 20th century, to see how homosexuals and artists in the 50s were the outcasts, and if they wanted to be different, that was fine, but they had their own very split-off community. There was no interaction with the mainframe, and how that had changed, that those individuals are now everywhere. Everyone is free to be an individual and can belong to a greater community and not have to be fractioned off. And so that was kind of what I wanted to see in that process. And by allowing Asheville to come forward and show me some of their individual aspects, but yet that wholesome community that I documented through the letters. I thought it was an overall successful project. It took a lot, but it was a successful project.
And you had a few exhibits, right?
Yeah, it first exhibited in 2009. We started the photos in 2007. We did the second round of photos post-fundraising in 2008, and exhibited in the summer of 2009 at the Satellite Gallery, and then kind of went to storage. I had a baby, and it came back out for 2 exhibits. I had an exhibit here in the Glen Rock Depot building during a studio stroll last year, and then it exhibited again over at AV Tech. So, yeah, now it just kind of sits in my storage until I can get them all cleaned up and ready to go over to
Is that what you're going to do?
Yeah, they're going to go to UNC Asheville. They're going to special collections. I just haven't had the moments necessary to really get them all back up to snuff. Some of the portraits have been damaged through the exhibits, and I want to make sure that when I donate them, everything is kind of...
What happens to them once they're there in the special exhibit?
They're all scanned, so they'll have the digital copies as well, so people can access them online. After I'm gone from this mortal plane, I'll be able to let them have all those digital negatives that they can share. You know, I run the Faces of Asheville website right now where everybody can visit and see all the photos, but that way they're still accessible, and they'll have the originals, including all the primary resource documents, so that if somebody, 100 years from now is wondering what was Asheville like 100 years ago, that's definitely one way they can access that.
Yeah, I loved looking at all the photos because I want to compliment you because you did really capture these personalities and the colors were
and that was one of the things that I was able, because you remember I said I did the house party because I wasn't sure how I was going to do as an interviewer, as somebody who's collecting these stories. And so I didn't want to have an an intimate experience with my people. I wasn't ready for that. Yeah. But come the second time, having learned so much from the people I had been able to take previous portraits of, I was ready to do it right.
Like what worked and what didn't. And
so,
what kind of
yeah, like I said, I warmed them up with a cup of tea that they, I had 50 varieties of tea. I went to Amazing Savings and bought every kind of tea possible because it was just... Everybody will have whatever tea they want. And hot cocoa and cider for those who didn't want tea. Something to warm you up and calm you down. Psychologically, that works. It works. If you drink something warm, it'll calm you down. So I wanted to ease people's nerves, have them fill out a little paperwork. And then when they were ready, they came in. And it started off with just asking questions about them, getting to know them, making eye contact, making them feel comfortable, sharing information about myself so that, what do we have in common that can put you sort of at ease? Using those kinds of, interviewing, tricks that kind of help people open up. And in that process, I was able to, get good pictures. And I gave everybody 20 minutes with me. And it was kind of like private. I had curtained it off. And in those 20 minutes, sometimes I would ask a lot of questions. I'd get to know you pretty well. But sometimes it'd only take me 5 minutes to get the good picture that I wanted.
Right.
And then I would just talk. We would just talk.
Oh, that's really cool. That seems like, a long time, but...
But sometimes, man, there's some people who do not want to be photographed. They might be there to be photographed, but that doesn't mean they want to.
Right.
And these are the people who are constantly blurry. Their eyes are constantly shut. They're constantly, subconsciously doing something to keep themselves from being pictured. And so I would keep taking the pictures until I got one I liked. There's only one person who didn't make it through to the final one, because I was like, everybody, I'm going to take pictures until I get one I like, and I'll know it when I do, and then we're good. One person came in and she was hungover, and she ended up getting sick in the studio. And I was just like, yeah, no, that's not gonna make it.
Yeah, that doesn't
I got like one picture of her before she was like, I was like, no. Nope.
I captured something, but we're gonna just make an extraneous variable.
No, there's some
people in Asheville.
Oh, man, there's some fascinating people though who came in, some fascinating experiences, and some of them almost spooky, that I still get chills talking about it. There were certain things I put out there as a photographer that I was like, okay, I really want to capture a nude. I really want to capture a pregnant woman. I really want to capture somebody playing with fire. I really want to capture, and I would put these kind of things out there to the universe. These are the things that I would like people to bring to me.
Because you've seen them.
And that's just something I think would be fun and challenging and interesting to see in the juxtaposition of putting everybody up together in the final portrait or in the final exhibit, because everybody was framed and matted the same, and they just all hung so that the walls are completely covered. So, you can get up,
awesome.
You can get up close and you really get a lot of information in one image, but then you step back and you see your community. You see the people that you see every day around Asheville, the people who serve you coffee, and the people who serve you lunch, and the people who are at the bank, and the people who are, it's just the teachers and the healthcare workers, all of them. But there was one, so the last day, the Wedge studio that I did it in, that building was owned by John Payne. And John was this amazing artist who moved here from Atlanta. He basically took old metal and reconstructed it to make life-size dinosaurs and birds with the wingspan of like 40 feet, like ridiculous, all made out of scrap metal, like these skeleton scrap metal dinosaurs. And you could use a Nintendo controller to move them around. He's a brilliant man. Yeah, he's incredibly brilliant, talented, and he bought the Wedge Studio and offered it up. It's very cheap, affordable, creative space for other artists to come and create. And a few months before this project, he had had a bad stroke and was left with some speech impediments. And so he had gone from being a guy who told jokes and was pretty vivacious and had a really sparkling personality to a kind of withdrawn guy. He kind of got quiet, a little bit more self-conscious of himself. And so he had to okay that I could come in and sublease from Ben. He wasn't going to just give it out to anybody. He wanted to see what this was about. And he signed off on it and let me move in for those 3 months. And I asked him front up, like, I really want to get your picture. I think that you're a very important part of the history of Asheville. You're one of the grandfathers of the River Arts District. You provided the space that helped turn Asheville into this arts mecca, and you're just a brilliant artist and man. I really think you need to be in this exhibit. He was kind of shy and didn't really want to, talk. We had a few conversations in the process, but overall he was pretty withdrawn, despite the fact that his studio was right next door. So we'd see each other every day that I came to the studio. And so finally, it was the last day. I just finished taking my last portrait, and it was of this woman named Lucille. She was 88 years old. She had lived in Asheville. She was born in Asheville. She was mixed, and her cousin was mixed as well. And her cousin could pass for white, but she had African-American features. She was this light coffee cream color. She was so beautiful, and she had piercing blue eyes. But she had African-American features that were, there's no question about it. So while her cousin, had African-American hair and African-American eyes, she had the features and the skin that passed her off as white. And so she was telling me all these wonderful stories about how she would be in Pack Square, and her cousin could use the bathrooms, but she couldn't. How her cousin could go to the Friday night dances, but she couldn't. How her cousin could ride the bus, but she couldn't. Despite the fact they were, the same. Yeah. The same in genetics. Didn't count for her. So then, she moved up to D.C. So she's telling me all these wonderful stories. It's a great moment to hear about the Jim Crow of Asheville, which is a story in and of itself. But I just finished taking her picture. She was the last person I had signed up. And then John comes over and he says, you know what? Here's a picture I've wanted to have my whole life, and I think I'm finally ready to take it. And I want to be nude in the fetal position on a black background. Because I let everybody design their own portrait, essentially. You came to me.
Did that shock you?
Well, I hadn't had a nude yet. So actually I was really excited because it was one of those things I'd asked the universe to give me. I was like, I really want to do a photo of a nude. And nobody had come to me yet.
Yeah. So you let them kind of say...
That was the only stipulation. I said, you come as you are, however that means. You can bring, and I asked, bring an object with you, tangible or intangible, that helps you to exhibit your personality or your role as an individual or amongst the community. And so everybody kind of brought their own things with them. That's
I was wondering how that
because I wanted to really communicate. That was what I did that was different from because, we had that conversation before.
Right, the first thing.
Everything has been done already.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is a completely original idea. But then what can you add? What is your spark? And so I took his, let's do pictures of the people in our community. But I want more information. I want to make this a more enriched documentary of these people because they have so many layers to them. And so I let them all come, and people brought fire, and people brought their babies, and people, brought their books, and I don't know. There's so many wonderful pictures. But so John said he wanted to be nude in the fetal position on a black backdrop. I said, okay, go get yourself ready. I'll prep the space, and we did the shot. That was that. A month later, he died. He had a second stroke, and it kind of just took him rather suddenly. It was the last portrait taken of him. And it's spooky because you look at that picture, it's not only the last picture of the project, it's kind of like a perfect bookend. Because people like him are my inspiration, like documenting what has Asheville become. Asheville became a place like this because of people like him. And so him to finalize the project with that final portrait was something special to me, even before he passed. But then to see it sort of as a bookend on his life, because it's the fetal position, it's nude, it's as you come into this world. And it's it's just so much to look at when you really see it, and you just see this like naked old man, in amongst like this black abyss. It's very much about birth to death. And I don't think he knew that second stroke was coming, but I think in some part of him he does, because artists are like that. Artists can kind of sometimes pick up on vibes that other people may not see, and I think that he knew something was coming, maybe. But yeah, so it was a really amazing moment. That was one of those stories that was just like, it sat with me. But oh man, I could go through all of them and tell you a story about each person.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
one of my favorite thing about excuse me, artists is that they never seem to miss an opportunity. I don't know.
If they're a good artist.
Yeah, if they're a good artist, yeah. It's like you see a finalized project, or you see this idea underway, and it's happening because they're like pushing for it to happen. Yeah. And it's like you gotta either go or do it or have it happen, and then along the way you get surprises like that, like
there's an ebb and flow to the universe, I think. And for me, there's this huge setback of the burglary, and there's some artists who would have given up at that moment, and for me, I use that as a jumping off point. And it really made the project that much stronger, that much more interesting, and that much more successful. And I actually see it as like the greatest blessing that happened in the whole process. But I also think that you can't fight it. You can't make something happen if it doesn't naturally want to occur. Mm-hmm. It's like the law of force in nature. You can't force things to happen. They break. So it's all about like kind of seeing where your opportunities are and then sliding yourself through there and seeing kind of how it takes it. So, but yeah, it was
wow, that's amazing.
It was a good project.
Yeah. Do you have are you gonna do something else, or are you?
I mean, I'm always doing something else. I do a lot of, I'm always doing.
Yeah, I saw weddings and.
Yeah, I mean, I think weddings are definitely documentary photography as well as portraiture. And a lot of knowing how to put people at ease. That has kind of helped me with working in weddings, because you got to be able to know how to work with people who are very nervous and have put a lot of money into this day, and they need everything to be perfect. And so to kind of just be easy to work with and to know how to get them to be comfortable with you, to like take these photos, that has all kind of, helped with what I learned through the Faces of Asheville project, because I hadn't done any weddings previous to that. But I have to do portraiture. I have to do documentary work. It's just who I am. It's part of what I do. And so I do a lot of, when there's protests in town that I find very interesting, I'll go and cover those. I covered the slut walk last year, and those portraits got picked up by CNN. And so that was kind of fun that because you never know what opportunity may come from taking pictures. You take them and you put them out there, and then if they go somewhere, they go somewhere,
Do you have them on social media? And
Flickr usually is one of the best ways for people to kind of find them.
Yeah.
And then knowing how to tag things on Twitter or Instagram now, because Instagram didn't exist nearly to the extent 2 years ago as it does today. And, in a few years it'll be something different. But, yeah, knowing how to properly tag your stuff on social media so that people can find it, and then you just wait for the opportunities to knock.
That's amazing.
You can't have expectations, but, you're just willing to listen when the door is knocking. So I do like up there. You see, those are some I did of the. That was the May 1st rally, which is International Workers' Day.
Yeah,
so these are when a bunch of Latin Americans came into town and were protesting immigration. I've done a lot of the Pride Fests and the things of that nature.
Do you have a favorite, or maybe not favorite, but
I'm just gonna refresh my memory real quick because I can't remember everything I've done because I just do it. Where is that book at? Oh, brother. I know one of the protests that I did that was really interesting was.
Oh, you put them all in books?
Some of them. I think this is just some of my photography, not documentary. I had a documentary portfolio, but it might be. It's a great book. Oh, here it is. This in a few years, but yeah. So this is like this is mostly rallies, gay pride rallies. This is one of my first digital cameras. It was a 6 megapixel POS, but it did the job. So these people put a giant ad in the Citizen Times, and they said, "We hate people." Oh, it was Wolf Laurel Ski Resort fired one of their photographers because they found out through her wedding announcement in the paper that she was marrying another woman, and then they fired her based on that.
Here?
Just. Up in Boone and Banner Elk.
Okay.
So, but it was, our paper picked up on it, and that's kind of we're like the central area for the region. So these people put a big thing in the paper saying, you should be allowed to hire and fire as you wish, regardless. Wholesome work environment, that kind of business. But they were kids that they had protesting, and they didn't know what they were protesting for. Obviously, they're kids. They can't make up these. Yeah, they don't care. They don't. You're just dragging them out there. And then in response, the pendulum swings, and so there was a whole other group of people who came out there to have their own protest in favor of queer rights. So that was kind of, a fun kind of thing. That was one of the first, what year was this? This was 2006. So that was one of the first queer rallies in Asheville. And then this is also in 2006. This is the immigration march coming through, and I was just experimenting here with colors and black and white, because black and white is typical documentary photography. This picture got a couple of college professors used it, so it went a little bit viral because I put it up on the web, and gets used, gets seen.
Do you get notified when it's
Sometimes people, if they can find where it came from, they'll come and ask me, can I use this? Can I credit you? Can I get a better copy resolution than what is found online? That's why advice to all photographers, people who are studying photography, don't put your full resolution on the web. Actually, two things. Put it up there on a web resolution, on Flickr or whatever. Tag the crap out of it so that it gets found. Yes, do that. Don't put your full resolution up there so that it can be taken by others, or even a high-quality, large resolution. Then find yourself a cloud space that is secure storage. Back up all your files. if you are working in digital photography, there's no excuse if you have a house fire or a magnet hits your computer or whatever else happens, you know, you dunk your hard drive underwater, whatever may happen with the cloud being what it is, go buy some storage at Google, pay $20 a month or whatever, and store all your high-resolution photos somewhere safe online that only you have access to.
Do you save all of your photos?
I try to. I try to back up everything onto an external hard drive, and then also onto the web, because that was something I learned with the burglary.
Yeah.
It was a big thing I learned right there. I was like, yep, have renter's insurance and back up everything. Like, don't take risks.
A friend in my class asked my teacher, you know, do you want us to save every single photo, like even the ones that you're not going to use for the thing? And he kind of had mixed feelings about it, but I think the conclusion was kind of, I wasn't really in the conversation, but the conclusion was kind of like, you know, if it's a good photo, but you know, if it's in focus and good and you don't particularly want to use it for like this project, but say like, you know, it's a fellow student, that person becomes like famous, I don't know, something.
Exactly, If it's not blurry, out of focus, that kind of business, I tend to save it. Mm-hmm. Although with digital photography, I tend to shoot on sports mode a lot because things change so quickly. Mm-hmm. Blink of an eye, literally. So when I take portraits of people, I don't take portrait, I go portrait, 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 stop. Portrait, 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 stop.
Is that what you did for Face of Asheville?
Yeah, so I would probably, I had so many pictures, it took me forever, and I needed a second set of eyes.
20 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes, you know, I would try like 10 different poses with some people. Some people would be the first pose, the first picture, boom, it's good. But some people not, and so, you know, do I need 40 of the same photo if you're frozen in time? No, I don't. I'll pick the one that might outshine the others, or I'll just pick one at random, and then that's that. But yeah, if you should always keep one of every good shot. Mm-hmm. So, and then it might not end up in your portfolio, but then you put it online, and your friend might get rich or blackmail them or whatever. So, yeah, so I did a lot of peace rallies, anti-war rallies, because this was, you know, the time of George W. Bush. That was kind of a big time. This one, though, I traveled down for a presidential rally in 2007 in Columbia, South Carolina, which, you know, is very, their state flag, no, Georgia has a state flag that has a Confederate flag in it, right?
Yeah.
But, Columbia's not much better.
No.
So they had the Nazi Party announce their presidential candidate for the Nazi Party, on the Capitol Hill steps, and it made national news, and it was just down the road, and I knew it was going to be pretty safe, but I wanted to see this craziness up front. And something like that in Asheville, I would probably go, although I tend to not want to go and document the stuff that I don't want to support. Although when I go, I dress as plain as possible. I try not to let myself stand out in any way, shape, or form. I very much try and look like a professional photographer in that moment. Browns and blacks, no colors. Make sure I always carry my card on me. And if I do a very specific portrait that I think I might want to release later, I have a waiver that I have in the back of my business card that people can sign so that they can give their portrait waiver over if I ever want to use that picture for something. Oh. You don't have to in documentary stuff if it's an event, but if it's public, if it's a public event, they are putting themselves out there. You don't have to have their permission to put it up on the web or make money from it. But if you are taking like a portrait, then you need a confidential agreement of some sort. And it can be really short. Like I said, mine's on the back of my business card, or it can be really long, pages and pages, depending on how much information you want to put there. So anyways, I was going down there to do this, and it was crazy. These people, man, just Nazis, freaky people. And the KKK were up there in the back. They're all doing this Sieg Heil business. And then there's these students, you know, the students. It's just the juxtaposition of the two of, like, this guy, oh, man, he had, like, a Nazi bullhorn. Where do they make these things? Like, so it's this, like, skinhead taking a picture of me, taking a picture of him, and then this guy who's just, like, the complete opposite, this old hippie.
You think he was pointing that at you?
Yeah, oh, yeah, they get off on this. They really do. Every time you see the street preachers that are trying to get people all upset, for every person who's preaching and trying to get people upset, there's at least 2 or 3 people in the crowd who are taking pictures and videographing whatever is going on, documenting it for their experience, because if anybody steps over the line, if anybody hurts them, if anybody threatens them, they have legal recourse and now documentation to say, I want to sue you because you've done something. So always be really careful about these people, because they get off on pissing people off and getting them to react. So I'm always really wary about that. These are some of my old, like I went down to New Orleans, took pictures pre-Katrina. This lady, this is from my early photography class. Like this is like some of the first stuff I ever did.
That's awesome.
She has some sort of crazy leprosy or something. I don't know.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I do.
Cool business card too.
Thanks. I just do what I do. You know, that's kind of how it is with the documentary work. And like I said, weddings, events, bar mitzvahs. That's how you make your money when you're a documentary photographer. You have to be able to market yourself and to be friendly, to be able to have people talk to you so that you can make money to support what you love. Because documentary work doesn't pay. Mm-mm. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Not typically.
Yeah, but it's so, I mean, when it catches on something, it's like...
But you'll end up publishing a book after your death. I promise you that. You take some good pictures of something that's happening around you, somebody will have to do a report about it sometime.
Go through your attic and see it. And
or now it's just on the web,
so
will find it. Yeah.
What am I thinking? I'm thinking like treasure chests and like stuff like that. Like
that was another woman. She was so amazing. The street photographer from Chicago who got discovered after her death just a couple years ago. Did you hear about that?
Mm-mm.
This woman, she was a nanny. And she was a single woman, she was a nanny, and she would just move from family to family, you know, Mary Poppins-like, and when she wasn't working on her days off, she'd go out and take medium format pictures of people in Chicago, and she has the best eye ever. She's one of the top documentary street photographers of all time. All time.
But she's dead.
Not discovered until way after her death. The people she was working with was going through some trunks of hers in the attic, and they stumbled upon all these negatives. None of them had ever been even put into prints. They were just negatives.
She just went out and took these...
Hundreds and thousands of these negatives of, like, the documentation of the street life of Chicago over decades. And they're just beautiful. Just beautiful. The way she captures humanity and the moment and the light and the scenery and just, it is...
I'm going to look that up. That's amazing.
Oh, my God. If I can find her, I'll send her your way. So yeah, and her collection, like the collection of her photos, you know, is just priceless.
That's awesome.
You know, she's dead. She didn't get any recognition during her life, but she immediately went from being somebody who was almost completely forgotten after her death to now one of the top 10 photographers of the 20th century.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And she didn't even print them out.
It was, you know, but that's one of those things. There's good artists who just don't have the means to communicate outside of their eyes, outside of the perspective they see. I know many photographers who just like to take pictures, but have no desire to start a conversation.
Yeah.
You know, they kind of hide behind the camera. They use it as that shield. Mm-hmm. Some people use it as a shield. And she was one of those types of people. She just wasn't the go-getter. She wasn't looking for, that wasn't her goal.
Yeah.
It was for pure self-satisfaction that she was taking these pictures.
That's funny because it completely opposite. We watched a film in class today. It's on YouTube. It was about the photographers for the White House and some past ones and the Obamas right now. And one of the photographers was talking about documenting 9/11 and how he was kind of hiding behind his camera and that he felt like he was doing that. And then, just the one is kind of, because it's his business to do that, you know, and he has like a job and he has like he needs to be portraying this stuff and to everybody. Yeah. And she, the Chicago woman was just taking these pictures for, I don't know. That would be so interesting to hear, like, because his reason's so simple. It's like, he's he's obviously likes Obama and he's taking pictures and that's his job. Like, that seems like what it sounded like. But her, I would be so interested to hear.
It wasn't even her job. She did not want money to have any part of
Didn't
why
even
she was creating.
Them fully.
And it was really about, it's and there's that fine line where a lot of people may not consider photography an art, but like I said, and photography can definitely be an art. It can definitely be an art. It can also definitely be money. They can cross the line, but for her, it was all about that art and the experience of the process. It wasn't about the product. It was about the process of taking the pictures for her, of taking walks, experiencing life, documenting what she saw, and then putting that away.
I'm hoping, Instagram and stuff is kind of like that, because you're just sharing.
I always worry about if there's ever like what's it called when there's a solar flare or an EMP, electromagnetic pulse. If something like that happens, it's basically a magnet, an electromagnetic pulse. Magnets will destroy computers better than just about anything else. And that's like how you want to, if you ever need to erase a hard drive, you take a magnet to it and just run it really good for a couple minutes, and that hard drive will be pretty wrecked. All the information on it will be pretty wrecked. So if an electromagnetic pulse happened, which would be like through a massive solar flare, or if something like a nuclear bomb was set off in the atmosphere, that would create a very similar effect. Or aliens, whatever. But if something like that ever happened in a doomsday scenario,
all this stuff would...
boom! All of our technology, all of our history. Now there are, Google has some storage places that will supposedly be able to withstand all that. There are places in Europe that have like these doomsday vaults where there's information that's protected in case, the world ends. But
God, I wonder what would be left.
Yeah. Sometimes I think about that, like, what's going to be left? And then I think, you know what, it doesn't really matter. It's such a big question. What matters is, when my kid's 18, will I have enough pictures of her when she was 2? And that's why, like, the phones are great. She's doing something cute. Hold on a second. Let me take a picture. Okay, now everybody, all my relatives all over the United States, 5 minutes later, you can see this. That's fascinating.
Is she a good model?
Oh, God. She's there's an amazing picture she took just the other night, which I was going to have to show off for a second because it's just so freaking adorable. Oh, actually,
she's so cute.
On Instagram. Yeah, she has a little toy camera over here that her godparents gave her for her birthday last year because they, I guess she was taking pictures of this. It's not right now, but she loves to take pictures with this little play school camera, and so she got a great picture of us when we were up at Max Patch 2 weekends ago flying a kite for the first time. She took a picture of me taking a picture of her. Oh. So it's this really like great little miniature reflection of like, she took that picture.
Oh, wow.
Portrait of her taking a picture of me.
She took that?
She took the picture that we're looking at.
Is it digital, that little camera?
Yeah, the little camera's digital. It's like 1.5 megapixel or something, but that's fine for a kid.
Oh, that is so awesome.
So it's a really, I don't know, it's
fun. You can just see her little forehead.
You see, like,
oh, that's
so it's just great, like her looking in my lens, taking a picture of me, taking a picture of her. So it's she likes the camera. And she gets like, okay, hold pose for a second. She's still really wiggly, but hopefully as she grows up, she'll grin and bear it. That's something I've always thought about, like,
because there's all those documenting a baby until the years.
all the way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's one of some sisters that started taking pictures every year. It was like 4 friends. I don't know. That's a big thing.
Right,
Taking a picture of yourself every day.
Again, that's that photography. The moment changes, the ephemeral moment, documenting the history, but the photography itself is even ephemeral.
Yeah.
And just kind of comparing it all. I don't know. It's a technology is the most amazing thing. It really, like that old Chinese curse / blessing says, may you live in interesting times, and we certainly do. It's going to be interesting.
I heard that, yeah.
Oh,
that's a good one.
May you live in interesting times. May you be noticed by people in high places. There's like 3 or 4 things, but it's a blessing and it's a curse. It's both ways. Yeah. Interesting times can be good or bad. Mm-hmm. Being noticed by people in high places can be good and bad. Yes, but there's like 3 or 4 in the Chinese curse. You can go look it up on Google sometime. But,
I will. Oh, cool. I've learned so much awesome things. Well, yeah. Well, that's perfect.
Cool. I hope there's plenty.
Yeah, there's definitely,
plenty
and
of info there.
I'll write it up and stuff. And
yeah, if you have any questions, just email me.
I will. I'd love to stay in touch.
And I'll send you the Obama stuff so you can see that.
Yeah, I'd love that because I mean that was one of the most.
I think that's probably my favorite thing that I've done
really?
so far. Because like leaving Asheville, I've seen Asheville so many times. I know all the spots to take pictures from, and it just doesn't challenge me anymore. But going off and seeing new things, that excites me.
That was such an amazing experience. Like even just looking around, that was a good day.
Yeah, and I wanted to capture it because I knew that if he was to be elected again 4 years later in 2012, it would not be the same at all.
Yeah.
And I've thought about that. You know, if he gets reelected, do I want to go up and do a second round and do the compare and contrast? And I haven't decided yet. So it's money. It's money to travel, and I wasn't a parent in 2008. I am in 2012, so there's a difference.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Anyways.
Cool. Well, yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Okay.
Do-do-do-do.
That was awesome.
Can I get you anything else before you go? Water, tea?
I'm good.